Wonderful, 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 wonderful. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, Global Africa. We are doing a live session of Sema Live. This is our maiden voyage, and we are very excited today to introduce you to our guests. Well, you don't need introduction because they've been live and direct on HiA Network for some time now, doing some amazing work. So first and foremost, introduce Titilayo, Ameh-Hill.
Hello, hello.
And Obi, brother Obi, Abuchi.
Yo, what up?
Welcome. Alexander, I can't say too much of this man, the right-hand man, the man that makes sure that HiA is moving. So welcome. We are in a joyous mood, which is fantastic, but we're here to talk some serious stuff today. As you know, it is the 10th of October, and this marks World Mental Health Day. And we said, as we've been discussing numerous issues around wellness and mental health issues, in fact, as I said, Obi and Titilayo actually have a group, a community space on HiA Network which deals specifically with this issue. We said, look, let's have a conversation about, something that oftentimes we leave elsewhere. We're busy, we're doing all kinds of things, we're trying to make money, we're raising families, we're professionals and so on. And oftentimes these issues just get left by the wayside. They need to be brought to the fore. And we said, yeah, let's do a session. Let's have a conversation amongst ourselves, but beamed out to our communities, and with the hope that we get a serious conversation going on in our various communities on the continent, in the diaspora, and so on. So, and I can introduce people, but I'd like to give them the floor and for them to just say a couple of things about who they are, what they're doing. So I'm going to start with Titilayo. Please, Titilayo, tell us who you are.
Hello, I am a mother of two, 15 and 12. And I live in Singapore. I've been a psychotherapist for 17 years, and I use all kinds of modalities. But right now I'm doing biofeedback therapy, and I run a program called Conquer Trauma and Live in Control. And I'll talk a little bit about trauma later and how to redefine that, because I know sometimes when you say trauma, it's like an event or something, quite big. But yes, so that's what I'm doing currently and loving it. I am an Afrobeats DJ by night, my second profession.
Fantastic.
And you will understand that.
Super. And Obi, please, you also.
Sure. So, hi everyone. Obi, Abuchi or Abuchi, as it's correctly pronounced. So I run a leadership coaching and training business. I've been an NLP practitioner, coach and trainer, facilitator, speaker for over 15 years now. And I come at a lot of the work that I do from this coaching and leadership development space, and particularly passionate about helping leaders develop themselves from the inside out rather than relying on all of the external resources as scaffolding in our lives, just unlocking this growth and development from the inside out. I am a father of 3 boys, 15, 13 and 11, and they keep me sane on one level. Yes, and married to a wonderful woman.
Fantastic.
That's me for now.
And Alexander, please tell us a bit about you.
Yes, my name is Alexander Osuka. I'm the projects and operations lead at Hosted in Africa. Also working with Femi daily, trying to get the network going, push it out to global Africa and our friends across the world. No children yet. Avid basketball player, and that's me in a nutshell.
Excellent, excellent. I'd say a very little bit about me. I've spoken much about myself on other shows. Just yeah, human rights background, professionally, being in the kind of education space, capacity building space, if you like, entrepreneurial space now, father of six, living on the continent at the moment, being born in the UK, now living in Tanzania, sometimes in Kenya. And yeah, we're here to really push out something that we truly believe in with the HiA Network and making traction. So we've done our intros. So let's get down to this subject matter. Where to start? Where to start? So I think I want to ask, if I may, and I'll start with you, Titilayo. I know your profession and your day to day very much brings you into the specter of mental health and wellness. What are you seeing in terms of your engagement with the various persons and communities, and specifically kind of Black African persons of African descent communities? What are you seeing?
Yes, that is an interesting question, particularly to do with Black Africans, because that's so mixed what that can be. There's those in diaspora, there's people who've grown up in the continent, there's people who've kind of grown up around the world. And so I guess with people who are in diaspora, I find the cultural identity seems to be a big deal at the moment, especially with all that's happened the past few years with Black Lives Matter. I think a lot has come up for people in terms of who I am, how do I show up, how do I speak up for myself? And a lot of rage, I would say, is coming out in that. A lot of anger in terms of things that happened in the past or presently around the world. I think in another sense, there's also trauma, as I talk about, people are having to face trauma. And so redefining trauma, not necessarily just like the traumatic events that happened, but Gabor Mate, he just wrote a book called The Myth of Normal, and he defines trauma as wounds that we sustain and the meanings and associations we attach to those wounds. So these could be childhood wounds, it could be present day wounds, but a lot of that is coming out now, where people, because COVID sort of helped people stop, because we're always busy, doing everything. And so it really stopped people to let everything come to the fore and to really think about, well, what's happened in my life? What's happened in my past? How is it affecting my present? How is it keeping me stuck or helpless, or in pain? And so it's been a lot of like going back to even generational stories with a lot of clients and people just sharing what's on their hearts and wanting to let go of that type of thing. How is it affecting my present?
Before I ask Obi a similar question, what are you seeing an essential difference between how, say, your Black females and males are engaging? What's the key difference, if any, that you're observing? And is this significant?
It is. I think what's interesting with my Black clients is the fact that there's a common thread in the stories that they bring. So typically it will be if they're working in organizations where they might be in the minority and maybe particularly abroad, where they're, in terms of the cultural mix, it's maybe more white-based. I find that a lot of them have similar stories about unconscious bias, just about trying to be in leadership positions, or if they are in leadership positions, how that might be tricky for them. But a lot is coming up about cultural differences and almost having to adapt, for years, having to adapt to a certain way of being and now wanting to be different, but feeling tired of not being understood or seen is a big one, particularly with the female ones, because there's that angry Black woman or angry Black man thing that they're always trying to fight against. So it's almost like they're trying to be themselves, but they're numbing themselves down because it's like, I don't want to appear to be this, angry Black person. But in fact, they need to be able to voice their opinions without feeling threatened or worried about how people will react to them. So that's quite a common thing.
Okay, we'll come back to that because that's a really important point. And also, I want to ask, if I may, a bit later about key differences you're seeing or not between diasporans and on the continent, because I think that we need to get to grips with some of those issues. Obi, let me bring you in on this. Similarly, I mean, you come from a different angle, like you said, from the more professional coaching and performance and so on, and a lot about how do we turn up in our best shape. If I think, I mean, tell me if I'm wrong, to perform at your optimum. How do we do that? What are you seeing in terms of the issues that come out regarding performance, regarding wanting to be the best you can be, and how that relates to our mental health and our wellness more generally?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I say I come at it from that professional, coaching angle, not necessarily the psychology and the psychotherapy, but there's also, I come at it from a personal angle as well, in the sense of its impact on me. And so there's a story that I've shared with some people recently, and I'll just read this text message that I got from a friend of mine in the middle of COVID, and it was, I've changed some of it for confidentiality, and this is a black guy, by the way. He said, "Hey, Obi, sorry for my silence. I'm in blah, blah, in hiding. and where they were in hiding was somewhere on the continent. I got so much burnout that I needed to get away from it all, doing 3 jobs non-stop for 2 years, often keeping long hours, is not good for one's mental health. I'm finding that out the hard way. Sorry, but had to share, and I returned to the UK at the end of the month." And I remember being quite shocked when I got this message, because I'd been interacting with this guy just the week before, and on the outside looked all fine, but clearly on the inside was struggling. And the reason though I wasn't shocked was because I had been there just 10 years prior to that, building it's probably second business at that time, and thinking that I could make it happen, and just various doors closed, and really down and depressed and suicidal, and feeling quite broken. And what's interesting, and this also, I see this play out with some of the clients that I'm coaching now, is there's this saying generally within the black community that if you want to get somewhere, that you've got to work twice as hard, right? And so that pressure of, we're ambitious, we want to make a difference, but the opportunities aren't as available. Like, we've really got to graft, you really got to hustle, you really got to fight for it. And in the midst of that, coming, again, generalization within the African community, where you don't necessarily talk about mental health. It's usually it's that strange thing. It's, oh, you mean you need to see a psychotherapist, or you're meant to go to you're going to be sectioned, right? It's not the thing that you do. And we're also, again, generally speaking, more of a spiritual community, so it's like, hey, just pray about it, right? And not really having healthy release valves, and then you layer on top of that some of what Titi talked about in more recent years, the BLM, and just an underlying dis-ease with some of the way we're perceived, and the pressure that we feel, and not knowing what's the best way to channel that in a healthy way, so that you're not just this angry person that is trying to say, hey, I'm not getting my needs met. You also want to be professional and do what you need to do. So there's a lot of that I've been seeing, and as I said, personally experienced, and seeing showing up in coaching conversations.
Good. You may hear in the background a naughty little kitten just This is live. I'm sorry, but this has happened, and I've got to let this little one in. Otherwise, he will destroy our interview. Please give me 1 second.
Black cat, she has something to say.
I mean, that's obviously while Femi's doing that, but that's
Yeah.
interesting though, isn't it? Because life just throws things our way, and I think
Okay.
part of that mental resilience to deal with mental health challenges is how do you deal with all of these things that life throws your way that's unexpected? That's,
Yes, yes. And I
yeah.
think what's been nice is that COVID has allowed us to relax a little bit, even on Zoom, because, you know, you've watched things from people's living rooms that have happened live on the news even. And you're
Sure.
like, it's just life. You know, we're doing life and things happen and, you know, we can be authentic about it.
Indeed. Femi, we were just saying, hey, that's just life, right? Part of
Yeah, I'm telling you.
that resilience that's needed is life throws things your way, and you've just got to be able
Exactly.
to roll with it.
Exactly. You know, I would say, the kids, they're all out, everything is fine. Let me have this interview, and now the kitten is making trouble. How does that happen? So anyway, Alexander, there's no hiding it. You're one of the younger ones on this call. Yeah. Tell us, from the younger generation, are you Gen Z, or are you, which one is it now? I'm not sure, but tell us, what is the kind of youth from your perspective, and you know your peers and so on? What's the kind of take on mental health? Is it a discussion?
Yes. So I'm termed as a millennial, which I think is between 1990 to 2000, and then Gen Z is generally from 2000 onwards. I think that's where you can draw the line for the age group. And with millennials, there's a lot more recognition of what's happening within ourselves, seeking out therapy, talking about it with at least with our close friends, and just that ability to open up and not as our parents' generation generally told us, you know, you just have to push through life without really thinking about what's bothering you, why is it bothering you, where does it come from, and sometimes it's just a little reflection can get you a long way, as opposed to just trying to push your way through every emotion and not think about where it's coming from. With Gen Z, they're a lot more outspoken about it. Some people say too outspoken. They'll just come in and say, you know what, I need a mental health day, and that doesn't gel well with, again, the former generation, especially with corporate culture. But I think it just helps to have these discussions more out in the open, especially within African communities, African families, people of African descent who, you know, no matter how they got to whichever continent they're in, we still carry those same cultures, systems, and mental health is kind of hidden away, especially if it becomes too much to bear. Anyone with anxiety, anyone with bipolar, anyone suffering depression, you don't want them to be the face of the family, so you hide them away, and that becomes something that's never talked about. Yeah.
And that issue of taboo, I mean, it's a strange one. I find it a strange one because I often argue, and I think, and I don't argue it from a kind of just a feeling. You see it often, is that within certain parts of and I'm talking the continental Africa now, my experience of it, be it Nigeria, Kenya, Tanzania, South Africa, and so on, that actually those who suffer from mental health sometimes are managed very, very well within the community. They're not locked away, not shunned, but at the same time, and I was having this discussion with one of our other interviewees from a different perspective. It was more about like stroke, those who suffer strokes and how they are then dealt with in the community. I'm wondering, is there a decisive difference between, say, the upper echelons of African societies, middle classes and so on, as compared to the more working classes, if that's a correct definition. And what I mean by that is, like you say, the shunning away of somebody who's struggling, mentally or what have you. I'm finding that the experiences I have of hearing of that is much more in the middle class, upper middle class type communities. Within the kind of my experience of, if you like, countryside Africa, and I'm not saying that I had 3 odd years, in rural Africa. Everything seemed to be managed much more. I mean, you knew the people who were struggling, but they weren't shunned anyway. They weren't taken to an institution. They were not taken to the hospital. Sometimes it's a bit of, this one is not well or what have you. But generally speaking, they're managed within the society. They are part of the society. And that person is somehow nurtured. People still look out for them and so on and so forth. They're fed, they're given somewhere to live and so on. Now, what's your experience of this, Titilayo? Is this like just my personal observation, or are you seeing that professionally?
In terms of the taboo, like with
Taboo, and then that kind of divides. Who's tabooing this? Is this happening at that kind of, in Swahili you say wananchi, the everyday person? Is it the everyday person who's creating the taboo, or is it more like, when you move up in society, it's like, you don't want anything now to be seen to be, somehow staining our reputation?
Yeah, that's an interesting one, because I mean, recently I had some conversations with, say, for example, a tailor in Nigeria and then a banker. And we were having a conversation about mental health because they were doing a consultation with me. Now, with the tailor, I found that it was easier for him to just, this is what's going on, don't have food, there's all this wahala. He was very comfortable with saying what was going on for him. However, when it came to shame, and so looking at shame as how Brené Brown describes it, where it's more of a label, guilt is more about the behavior, shame is more, I'm stupid, I'm a failure, a lot there, that type of thing. When it came to that, there would be sort of a pause in the conversation, because it's like, well, you're not able to go that deep. And even in understanding mental health, there was a lot of shame attached to, I don't want to be seen as crazy, or I would say people on the streets who have dada, that's the association. So he couldn't go further. Same with the banker as well. It was just, this woman, after speaking to her, I could see that she was experiencing panic attacks before she went to work. But she didn't even know what that was. She was just like, I'm just nervous. I have a new boss. I have to perform. And I just sit in my car and I just shake for about 30 minutes. And then I go into work. And she was doing this every day for 3 months.
Wow.
So I think it is that people don't really understand what mental health challenges are, because they associate it with being crazy. So it kind of inhibits them from really going and exploring. Now, of course, I joke with them. Sometimes I even tease it out of them and say, so you wanted to tell her to shut up. It's like, no, not like that. I said, Nala, you wanted to tell them to shut, and then they'll open up, because you have to kind of make them comfortable with the shame. But it's difficult across the board. But I find that maybe if you say with the working class, there's more of this sense of being able to talk about struggle.
That's interesting. Yeah, it's like it's a recognizable part of the day.
Yes, exactly. Because there's some comforts that you don't enjoy all the time. So, for him, it's like, well, there's no lights, there's mosquito here, there's all sorts of things going on, and it's all part of the language of we're in the hustle. So, whereas if you have certain comforts in your life, and society is changing as well, we used to have that village community where we share everything, we help each other. Now we're going in our little cocoons and living in our nice houses. We don't interact as much. Now, I know that's different with Africans in diaspora compared to those on the continent, because I think there is still that community. But it feels like people are retreating a little bit more because of reputation. And then also, religion, says that you only speak to your pastor about your problems. And in some places, there's also, if you talk too much about your problems, then the demons or the evil spirits, you catch it and then you manifest it to happen. So you're not even allowed to say, oh, I'm sick or I have a headache. It's like, in Jesus' name, I am well. It's like, okay, but the headache is still, bothering you and still throbbing, right? But even allowing yourself to just say, I have a problem is difficult.
Yeah. Obi, help us on this. Come and help us on this.
Not sure it's about helping, but I guess just adding to the conversation. One of the things that was going through my mind is, so there's the piece about the maybe more working class and then kind of middle to upper class, and just that expectation of how do I look and how am I showing up, and is this okay to talk about. Here I'm in the UK, and you've had more famous people, more prominent people talk about it, and it suddenly makes it okay. Generally speaking, so I grew up in Nigeria for 10 years, and typically men wouldn't talk about any issue. So, it's always that they're tough. And then prominent people wouldn't talk about it either. And a lot of the prominent people, I'd throw the religious people in that category as well. And so, I agree that it's the people who are more likely to talk about it easily are the working class. Because like, hey, it really is tough and it really is hard, and everyone else wants to put on a good face, really. And so it's taboo. The thing about taboo is that it's that idea of it's just not talked about. And when something isn't talked about, then it's not normalized. And then when you're experiencing it yourself, you're thinking, well, should I really, maybe something is wrong with me. And so not wanting to do that. Now, I get, at a friendship level, people would, but that's the thing I think that has been challenging, generally speaking, for the African community, that the understanding of just mental health and well-being isn't as, and the nature of the conversation isn't at a level that makes it easy for people to talk about the variation of it, from the dada, I'm crazy, to actually it's been a stressful day, right? And just all sorts of language around it that makes it more accessible, that when you say you're having mental health challenges, it doesn't mean you're going cuckoo. It just means, it's a bit of a tough season, bit of a tough time, and that's okay. So I think there's more of that accessibility that's needed for the language, so that people feel it's fine, and I can be fine in my faith and but whatever that is, and yet still it's a tough day, right? It's not, it doesn't mean it's either or, but I can hold those two things together, and I think that's something that's growing as more people just from African backgrounds talk about this.
No, absolutely. Absolutely. You gave some kind of anecdotes about, someone you'd known who'd gone through a lot of this. And I mean, I'll bring something in personal, if I may. Like, my mum struggled big time with mental health issues. And a lot of it was reputational. Of course, there were big hardships that she endured, which don't necessarily have to be discussed here. But the point, and I remember being a child thinking, Mum, this has happened, and you've got like a big family at home in Nigeria who can help to support. And part and parcel was no, you can't go back to bring shame. The whole thing of shame again, like you mentioned earlier. And I've seen a lot of diasporans, if I may say so, be it African, be it Caribbean, you name it, who've had that kind of hardship. And you see, alienation comes in so many different ways, even just from environment, even from the lack of sun, which actually is a serious thing that we don't give enough credence to. We need the sun. It's vitamin D, and it's how we're made. So when you have a reduction of that, it actually impacts you. And sometimes, we're not cognizant of these issues enough. But that shame, I raise it again because at what point, and this is the conversation between home and abroad, if you like. Abroad is home. We, a number of us on the call were born there, and it's a home. And yet you have another home that, as far as they're concerned, you've gone to a land that is paved with gold. You must achieve. You may have been coming from a well-to-do family, failure doesn't come into the discussion. So that pressure is on you, and then how is that being passed on to the children? You see, that's the other thing now. Like you said, that kind of intergenerational thing. And we're only going, that's just one generation. We're not even going further back. And I found throughout the communities I've engaged in that this was a huge issue, and that people ended up, sorry to say it this way, even dying abroad when it wasn't their intention. The intention was always to go back home. And they ended up staying and dying in foreign, maybe it's not a foreign land, it becomes somehow home, but it wasn't their intention. And this issue of shame, I think I raise it again because it's huge, and I'm just wondering, how has it impacted? We're the offspring of parents who came from other shores to be in the diaspora. How has that impacted us, and how are we dealing with it with our children or our various relationships? It'd be unfair to ask Alexander that question, but I would put a bit on you because your time in Kenya, you're mixing with a lot of the university. I know the university you went to. It's even if it's not necessarily highly international, it's definitely highly continental. Are you seeing some of those issues or discussions in your kind of peer group? I know like the Rwandans are coming, Ugandans are coming. How are your friends kind of grappling with their parental experience and how it's impacted on them?
Well, I haven't seen it discussed very openly. I think among close friend groups, and in safe spaces, like I know that the university had a therapist who would do sessions. So maybe in those kind of contexts is where people would open up and talk about these things. As I said, I feel like my generation really started to broach that subject, even if, again, in just small circles. Gen Z, even, as I said, more outspoken. They're more willing to just say what they're going through, what's in their mind, how they feel, what's making them feel that. I mean, not to a stranger, but because they're much more aware, they realize that, okay, this is normal, and I should be able to say this to someone I'm speaking to because it's a universal experience and not something I have to hide because I'm the only one going through it.
So can I interrupt you on that point? Because Obi was talking about the kind of normalization. So where is that normalization coming from? Why is it that people, of your generation, how are they feeling that, this is normal? Why are people so comfortable to discuss it then? Because it's not necessarily my experience. I don't think it's any of ours. And so it'd be good to know what are you hearing, what are you seeing that's enabling you to, if you like, free yourself from a burden?
That's a very interesting question. I think it's very tiny cultural shifts that sort of start from the fray and come into the center. And I don't know if you're going to be familiar with anything I'm about to say, but there used to be this culture of being an emo, which means an emotional person.
Okay.
And it used to be people who were gothic, paint their nails black, want to walk around sad all the time, listen to sad music. And they were kind of on the fringes of the of popular culture. But then from that space, those are people trying to be open about things that are bothering them. They're depressed, and then they find solace in this culture of, yeah, let me show people I'm sad. Yeah, let me show out on the outside what's happening on the inside. Let me not be one of those people who just smiles and then goes home to cry. And then that just picked up very slowly. They ditched the garb and the black hair and the black nails, but at least it started a conversation. The sad kid isn't the only sad person in school. You're sad too. You just hide it better, and then one day you crash, and then you start to talk about it. You find that those commonalities with the people around you. That's what I would say it was like. It's something from the fringes that came in, and we also have to recognize these signs within each other.
That's very interesting. Yeah. So Titilayo, what I mean, that's really interesting, and you know the thing about Alexander's experience, as I'm saying, sometimes there's this notion that on the continent we are not grappling with it. I mean, in a sense, he's challenging that notion, and it may be that we're not seeing what's happening from that angle. I don't know, but what he said. How does that resonate for you and the work you're kind of doing?
It's and then we have social media as well. You have artists who are being more open about their emotions. They're singing about it, and so all of that influences culture. I think in the international sense, even in schools now, you have school counselors. I think in places in Africa too, school counseling is coming up. You have guidance counselors, and people are starting to see that there's a need to talk to somebody. So I agree. I think that these icons and these type of people that come and represent, it does change your mindset about it. And I think it's changing for a lot of people in diaspora as well. I'll give you an example. Because you were talking about generational trauma and how it affects you even in present day. It's difficult because our parents they didn't have the language. They didn't have counselors. It wasn't like you could go and cry about something. It's like, you have to go and work. We have to get an education. We need to make money for the family. So it was kind of a luxury to have this sense of like what's going on inside. So if you've got years of that in your wiring in your brain, then try to open up to someone. It's very difficult. And I remember when I was 7, my parents were going through a separation, and my mom at the time, was a diplomat, so she had to move us to Senegal. When we got to Senegal, I went to this international school, and here I was, a 7-year-old who had just moved from her country and spoken English all my life. But then when I got to the school, they said, you have an accent. So we're going to put you in a group with English as a second language. And I'm like, but I do speak English. But it wasn't English as they spoke it, so I was put in the group. So there I was. I hadn't seen so many white people in my life, and I had a response to that. That's where a womb started for me. So recently I went to a business event, and usually if I know there's going to be a lot of mainly white people or people who don't look like me in there, I have some level of anxiety. But strangely, in this particular group, we really vibed. Everything was fine. I was enjoying myself. I even taught them how to dance Jerusalema. We were just having a great time. Of course, I was that person. my, I took my biofeedback machine with me, and that's another thing actually. Therapy is even evolving where you can use machines to actually find stresses in your body and translate that to you. So you don't have to do guesswork with your clients anymore. So the biofeedback machine actually finds those stresses, and then
Wow.
you can your clients that way. But I knew I was going to be a bit stressed, so I took my machine, and you don't have to be like harnessed with it. You can do it virtually. And so my top 10 stresses said trauma response. And I was like, but I'm happy. Like I'm having a great time, I'm dancing. Why is it showing trauma response? I switched the machine off, did the test again, and trauma response was still there. Now, because I've done inner work, I thought, okay, something's happening here. There's a dissonance. On the outside, I'm confident, I'm playing and having a good time. And on the inside, something isn't quite right. And I just remembered 7 years old, that little girl went into that white environment. She was trying to belong. She was told she wasn't good enough. Her accent wasn't this.
Wow.
All of that was trauma still in my body that was presenting itself because I was so drained in this event for the 3 days. Because all that energy of the wound sustained and the associations and meanings, I was working on that unconsciously, subconsciously all the time.
Hey.
Until I paused and validated that inner child, that 7-year-old, and said, I'm sorry that happened to you. I'm sorry that you missed your dad. I'm sorry that you had to run away from your homeland and come into this place where you weren't fully accepted as you were. And you had to learn to familiarize, as I like to say, adapt, to what do I need to do to belong. So you can imagine all that work, right? If you don't even know that you have wounds inside of you, and if you don't even know that your inner child has been hurt in the past with challenges that can still affect you in present day, that's where all the repressed emotions come. That's where the mental health challenges come. That's where you get the chronic illnesses, because your body keeps a score and so does your mind. So it gets trapped somewhere in there. I was coughing like a madman. I was like, why today? I don't want to be the only Black woman in the room who is coughing so loud. Because all the trauma was coming out. And so once I was able to acknowledge it and I was using the biofeedback machine to calm my nervous system, the next day I was a completely different person. I was answering questions. People were like, oh, what happened to you? I was like, that's between me and myself. But so that's why it's important when we talk about shame and trauma and generationally how these things affect you. You have to start by talking. Now, it just so happened that in this event, we could have that language. So I did tell the person next to me, hey, this is what's going on. And she, in turn, affirmed me. We had a hug, we had a cry in this event, right? And I was able to heal. But I think for a lot of us, we have wounds from way young, and so do our parents, have wounds from way young that stay trapped and stay past. And if we don't talk about it, we develop these, issues as a result, these challenges.
Now, I have a big question. Because as you're saying this stuff, and I'm learning new stuff here, big time. So even if I think I'm well read on certain things, you're saying certain things, I'll be, oh my God. And what's coming to my mind with what you're saying is, we are interconnected beings, globally anyway, yeah? Whether we like it or not, we're interconnected. And that individualized trauma, I'm thinking, can also be amplified into a collective trauma.
Of course.
And so when we're talking, and so what strikes me when you were saying this stuff, I know even us Africans have been in so many scenarios. Oh, colonialism was such a far time away. Slavery was such a far time away. Now, if you've never dealt with those things at that cellular level, how will it just disappear? So I'm wondering with what you're saying here, and you're sharing on that kind of personal level. What would you say about that kind of collective trauma? Because I think that this is huge for how we as peoples, and I have this conversation with a lot of groups, us who came from this part, we were also traumatized, but we've done so much better than you guys. But there's all this kind of compare and contrast. What would you say to that? With what you know professionally and spiritually and all other kind of isms
So I
and
will,
schisms.
I will, yeah, no, I will ask for an open mind here because this has been quite a journey. And the things I'm sharing personally because there's some information from clients that are kind of confidential. But I will say that these are the type of things that come out in therapy when we speak. So you talk about generational trauma and colonialism. I recently had a spiritual journey where I found out that years back, in my particular tribe, they were raped, they were sent into slavery and all of that. And I spoke to my mom about it, and she never told me that this has happened. But what was coming up for me was a lot of unforgiveness. Like I was always the only Black person in a lot of white environments, but I was always the advocate. Like there was always something to fight about. But when you feel this fight doesn't feel like it's mine. It's just so intense. It's like I'm chill TT, African DJ who just likes to have fun. But once you get me in that room with these people, especially people in authority, this whole other person comes out. And so as I was tracing it back, I realized the rage of my ancestors were fully inside of me. And the pain, because sometimes you disconnect from, well, slavery happened in the US and other parts of the world, but your families were separated in Africa. They were raped. Like there was grief, there was loss that was experienced in your immediate. Can you imagine that with your child? Suddenly you're nursing your baby and they're ripped out away from you. That affects, there's a grief that is passed on through that. But I was carrying this burden of, I've got to defend, I've got to advocate, I've got to fight. Now there's a place for that. But when it becomes debilitating in your health because you're having sleepless nights, because you're rehashing that conversation and say, I should have said this, I should have, and all of that, then it's too much. When I realized that and started to talk about it and even discuss it with my mom, she could share her stories. It was just this huge weight that was lifted off. So I think that it is important to, as much as you can, trace back what's happened, or at least connect with the fact that as Africans in some places, there was a loss, there was a huge separation, and it was intense, as well. So I think there's a space for that.
What's interesting for me, just as we're talking, is one piece is understanding identity and how all of these different issues play on how we see ourselves wherever we are in the world. And then there's something else about just the basic skills of growing and maturing and learning how to talk about things and have that release valve. But just to speak into this identity piece and the collective sense, because I was born here in the UK and then moved back to Nigeria for 10 years. And it was a wonderful time. But it then created this confusion in terms of my identity. One, because I'm back in Nigeria and I think I'm among my people, but I don't feel at home. And also, they didn't necessarily make me feel at home all the time. They're like, oh, you're that kid from England. And so I'm feeling like, okay, but I'm around people who look like me, but they're telling me that I'm not really one of them. And how do I make sense of that? Then I come back to the UK and I think, okay, I feel at home, but these aren't my people, and I know there's a disconnect. And I remember it really came to life. I mean, a lot of us watched movies like Roots. I remember watching 12 Years a Slave, and for about 3 days after that, my white friends, I just couldn't chat with them. And it was really weird because I can't give stories of, oh, my mum was a slave or my dad was this. No, I can trace back their heritage within Nigeria. But it was just this sense of, I could have been born in a different place, and because I have the skin that I have, then there's this, there's racism, there's floggings, there's lynchings, all sorts. And then you can't help but look around the world and just see, oh, so some of those barriers are in place because of this way of thinking amongst a certain group of people, and you just get caught up in that, right? And so there is that collective, the trauma that a specific group, just by virtue of being part of that group, and that group has been marginalized or put down or whatever, you feel it. And I've felt that, and you can't get away from that. And then, as I mentioned, just the skill level, just those typical skills of, hey, open up or talk or share or get input from people, not seeing as much of that in my community naturally, where people wouldn't talk about, I'm going for counseling, or then you don't develop some of the skills that help you to just get things off your chest and deal with some of these deep wounds, and go to a place of healing as well. So I've had to fight a lot for that over time, regardless of, well, I don't care what people think, I'm going for counseling, I'm going on a mindful self-compassion course, I'm getting NLP, I'm getting coaching, whatever the case, therapy, just to do that work and recognize that actually this isn't even a black or white issue. This is just, as a human being, a human being, there are wounds that just require healing. So we all require inner work and inner healing. And I think that's a big passion we have, obviously, with the Wellness Africa, is just to say, this is a journey that all human beings need, regardless.
Absolutely.
And we, as a group, have some unique wounds and traumas and concern issues that are important for us to work through, so that we can show up as healthy as possible wherever we're at.
No, absolutely. I really like what you're saying there, and you know that issue of universality is important, and actually it can be an aid to connect even with those who we may have viewed differently at different times and what have you. But one of the things I've found about, you know, kind of deep introspection, which I think is severely underrated, is the ability it gives you to create. It's a creative force to go inside, because, you know, in the complexity of our inner world is just, it's just like out here. So living outside always, where you're just being hit with all kinds of data, sometimes, you know, most of the time, it's very distractive. We're distracted. And so having that space and finding that space, I mean, I personally, I think of childhood and introspection as being my survival kit. And wherever I got it from, I'm grateful. And I believe it was the Almighty. That's my view. But I really do think that when I think about, you know, the lack of, say, opportunity because of circumstances, it was the inner world that provided a different level of opportunity, where you could actually go outside of your immediate kind of zone, which may not have been as broad as you wanted it to be. But the inner world then was completely different. You could go wherever you wanted to, you know, and you could explore the depths of who you were, who you are, and so on, and connect it. I mean, it might sound what it's psychobabble, but you know, but you know, the point is that, you know, us Africans and in our hardships and all the rest, we're as three-dimensional or as four-dimensional as anybody else on the planet, and we must pay credence to this. And I'm really just really happy that, you know, even ourselves, and I know this, we're doing this as a live broadcast, but I know that this is something that we do amongst ourselves when we get together with our communities, with our friends, and it's just also encouraging that we will, of course, and encouraging others to do that. But I want to, Alexander, coming back to you, because some of the things you've said, it kind of gives a lot of hope when, you know, you're a young black male, you're confident, you know, gone through your issues, however they are, and speak in a very natural way about, you know, these issues and how that is now, very much part of life. Now, thinking about, you know, progressing this as a topic within, you know, kind of your group, within your groups, and also the conversation with persons. I mean, we talk, but I don't know if your group are necessarily always conversing or talking with the older generation. how is that going? Or is it amongst yourselves to kind of create your own bubble? Or is this being translated or put back, if you like, with parents, with aunties, uncles, so that there is that, connection?
I think what I've seen is it's still mainly amongst ourselves, and the only people who talk about it to their parents or elders are those whose parents or elders, they have a special relationship where they can be almost friends with each other. And it's not just the I'm the elder, you're the child, you listen kind of relationship. That's what I feel. Um, I believe there are some efforts to start those conversations because as we become more aware of these issues, we start going to therapy. And we generally can't afford therapy by ourselves. So we'll ask our parents for it, or we'll be included in our uh, health insurance cover, that kind of thing. And that kind of opens the door. You say, okay, mom or dad, I'm going to therapy. And they say, okay. They say, I've been prescribed meds. And they say, okay, that's maybe what for? And you say, okay, I'm having anxiety. And they say, okay, you have anxiety. A few weeks later, they ask, how's the anxiety going? And it's just opening little doors to finally get to a place where maybe they start to understand what you're going through a little better. Hopefully they understand themselves. Maybe they seek help if they need it. And that's what I am doing.
No, I hear that, and I hear that, and I was gonna say, I keep having these conversations with younger parents, and one of the things they say, oh goodness, the way my kids speak to me, I wouldn't have dared have said that to my parents, and so you know what I mean. So there is, and it's not that they've gone out of their way, it's just that the parenting is quite different, and it's open. So that kind of friendship. I mean, of course, you still have to be the guide and you create the boundaries. But I was telling somebody the other day, my kids say something, oh daddy, sometimes I wish you just smacked us, all this talk. And I was like, yeah, seriously, I'm telling you. Even my 6-year-old daughter said, yeah, just smack us, we don't want to hear anymore like this. But so there's the conversational angle. No, but I'm glad that we can have these conversations and stuff, and it's great. But I would just wonder what's changed. I mean, because sometimes it isn't that we've gone through a formula of change. It's just we're doing it differently, but not necessarily being guided by it. I mean, not necessarily having had therapy, and of course. It may be that you can't even afford therapy, even if your parents can't even afford it. So, and there's change in lots of communities in that kind of way. So, Titilayo, let me come to you again because as a practitioner in this field, why is that change happening?
Actually, I need to retract a little bit because I don't think I've given justice to our traditional African therapy. Because I'm coming from a cerebral psychotherapy Western training, right? The Youngs and the Freuds and all of that. And it's a lot of talk therapy. But actually, recently I've been really looking into our traditional practices and what healing looked like in those days. I mean, when someone dies, in a lot of places, you actually have women who sit and wail for a week. You just cry and cry and cry. And that's all part of that name it. Yeah, name it to tame it. Like we're allowed to just weep about it because someone has died. So we actually do have a lot of therapeutic models in African, in indigenous communities that I think we've lost because of the influences that we have. We have traditional medicines, right, that heal us on an emotional level. This is what homeopathy is now in the West, where it's like you have something, you take it, it rebalances your body. I mean, people are taking herbs from Africa and turning it into little tea bags, herbal teas. And these are things that are steeped in our culture that I think we moved away from. dancing for one. So Daniel Siegel, another famous one, he talks about move it to lose it. This idea that you shake out the emotions. We've been doing that for years, years and years and years. So I do think that in our traditional systems, sometimes we may have demonized spirituality in Africa to the extent that we no longer use these practices because we think that it might be like from the occult or something like that. But actually, if you think about it, a lot of those practices people are using now in different forms, this sense of energetic healing. So I think that there are different ways of doing it. I lived in China for 7 years and I learned a lot about your qi, your energy. They do acupuncture, you have too much fire in your liver, and they don't necessarily always talk about what they're going through, but they heal through different ways. So it's like there is the sense in which people are moving back to spiritual type of healing, are wanting to go back to meditations and mindfulness. It's becoming a trend because I think that actually we don't always just need to talk to a psychotherapist. There's many other ways to do that. But I think traditionally, it's become difficult for people to want to open up because of the pain that they're going through.
I really love that piece actually about validating the African, the cultural, nuanced ways of getting to a healthy place, right? I mean, this isn't mental health, but as Titi was speaking, I just remembered being in boarding school and I'd have malaria and I'd go home and my mum would make some wonderful pepper soup. And I would sweat it all out. But it's just, I look at that and just the love around it, right? I don't, someone would say, yeah, but what was in the pepper soup? Was there any, paracetamol or this? Nothing. It was just some good old fashioned herbs and pepper. And so a natural way of healing. And as I said, I don't just think of the pepper soup, I also think of the love and just the feeling of safety and being looked after and some good old fashioned TLC to help me heal through that. And like I said, it's not a mental health issue, but there are just natural ways of healing, dancing, connecting. I think of a lot of our funerals that whilst not the wailing part, but just the celebration of life and the coming together and from the wake keeping to that whole process of there's a lot of thought behind it, and it's a community feeling that helps you come to terms with a really traumatic experience, which is the loss of a loved one. Just to validate and echo the support of a lot of the traditional ways, and I think what would be lovely is just to have a way of showcasing it and giving some just prominence to it that says, hey, here are some talking therapy approaches, here are some traditional therapy approaches, cultural therapy approaches to us healing, growing and moving forward.
No, absolutely love that. And I think it's when we think about, again, if we use that issue of shame, shame has broadened out into being feeling ashamed of our culture. It's happened too often. I remember as kids, and it might be different for you, Alexander, you're brought up in the majority space, but as kids, it's like, what you ate, how you dress, it was different. And sometimes you wanted, should my friends come and see the way I'm eating a bar with okra soup at home, you didn't necessarily want to show that part. But a point came actually quite early on, and I was really grateful for this, where it was something that we totally celebrated. You go to church, you'd wear your clothes. I don't like, some people say, what a nice costume. It's not a costume. That is my dress. That is that's what I wear. I'm not going to fancy dress. You know what I mean? So it's like that point of we are expressing who we are, using and remembering that as the oldest genome on the planet, we ought to know and do know quite a bit about survival and those types of things, and how to nurture ourselves and so on. And the rape and pillage that you mentioned, and I think sometimes we do have to say in a matter-of-fact way and not be alarmed by that. There was rape and pillage, and that rape and pillage also infused into our cultures. It's like, that is no longer good. You know, so much of our culture, when you come and break it down, is science, it's technology.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? It's science and it's technology, and then what happens is that someone else comes and patents it and does it in a different way, causes something else, and all of a sudden, it's a big trend. And we've been doing this for years. So I think absolutely, it's really important that we kind of hold on to this, and not just hold on to it actually. It's actually to document it in our various forms, because it will get lost. All those older people that are still with us, we need to document it. Recordings, writings, how in our ways. You know, we're very oral, people. It's not just to write it in a book. Maybe we don't want to write in a book. Get somebody in a room and let's tape. Let's tape the experience. Let's record it. Now you can have a recording, an audio recording. How much data does it take up? It's very little. So we can have these things running parallel so that we can share this information and celebrate it, like you said, Obi. It's so important to celebrate this as something that is our core identity that we can share amongst ourselves and share to others. Just like they share everything, that's what, the global world is all about. Ultimately, is how are we interconnected and how do we share, borrow from each other and help to grow us all. That's fine. I have no issue about, us as Africans using our cultural depth and our cultural understanding to share that knowledge. When we talk a lot on HiA Network, as you know, of Ubuntu and what that ultimately means, how that brings us together, how it's a higher form in our view of of kind of human relations. It's a higher, it is. I mean, I don't even think that we should shy away from saying that it's a higher form of existence than, a very selfish way of being, which has got our world into a lot of trouble. So let's celebrate that, bring it back on. And I think the point is now, how do we present it in a manner that is not just palatable, but makes sense in the things that we do, like, in technology, in economics. So, our kind of centers of excellence now fuse around what is core to, our way of life and spread the love. So, yeah. So, me, I go off on a whim from time to time.
I mean. African is good. You're passionate.
No, I hear you, and just one connection for me to mental health and what you were saying is this idea of expressing ourselves, just being able to express ourselves fully in our culture and our heritage. And I think when that is stifled, whether we're aware of it or not, that stifling causes internal issues. It causes a fracture internally that sometimes we're not even able to make sense of. And I know when I was younger, I couldn't quite make sense of it. And it's only as I'm in my early 40s now that I'm making sense of some of that fracture of not being able to express who I fully was from a cultural perspective. So I think perhaps, as Alexander was saying, that maybe the younger generation are experiencing more of that now, right? I mean, I put on Capital Radio and I'm hearing Afro beats now. It's just, it's the expression of who we are is becoming more mainstream, and so I think there's a joy that comes with that, whereas there was a time where it was considered, that's a bit of a weird thing, but now it's like, okay, let's showcase this to the world, because it's all that hierarchy is being addressed. So
the only thing I would add to that is let us make sure that we fully capitalize on those things economically as well, because sometimes they become mainstream, but we're not the owners of You know, and that I mean that's a different discussion, of course.
That is a different discussion. But I think one that we need to come back to. You're totally
Definitely.
right. Just,
Yeah. And
for sure.
maybe that's a good segue into something that's coming soon on HiA, a session on IP. So we're just telling you, intellectual property. We'll be doing something soon on this because it's one of those subject matters that sometimes gets lost. And we're talking about traditional knowledge. We're talking about our cultural identities and so on, and how does that play out in the real space of bonding. And it's an exponent of who you are. If you think of America, if you think of Europe, if you think of Great Britain, it has a brand that it exposes to the rest of the world. What is our brand? Sorry, I don't want to talk economics in that kind of way because it's spiritual as well. But these things are important.
Sure.
So look, I think we need to wrap up. We know we normally do these for an hour. This conversation can go for a couple of days, even more.
Okay.
So I think, we'll start with you, Alexander, and then we allow our guests, as we always do, to have the last word. So Alexander, what are you going to tell to our audience today in terms of mental health and keeping this thing real and keeping it on the table?
Right. I would just say take care of your mind the way you would take care of your body. Find time to sit, reflect if you need to. It's like a mental shower. If you don't shower for a week, you're in problem. If you don't reflect for a week, you'll also be in problem. So definitely do that and get the help you need if you're struggling, even if you don't know what it is. I know the first time I was depressed, I didn't know what that was. I just thought what I'd been told, being raised, don't be lazy. So I can't find the energy to get out of bed, and I just assume I'm being lazy, but that's not it at all. So even if you don't understand what's happening, just go and tell someone, I don't understand what's happening. Try and find out what it is. Yeah.
Cool. Thank you. Obi, tell me, or tell us.
Well, I will. I share this often. Growing up, in Nigeria, we'd stop on the side of the road and you buy orange, you buy banana, you buy granite, all of that. And there's something that's stuck with me is when you squeeze an orange, you squeeze a grapefruit, what's on the inside will come out. And life is squeezing us all the time, right? And we want to make sure that what's on the inside, which is really our mental well-being, is as healthy as possible. So do what you can to take care of that, and then you'll be able to navigate life more purposefully, in a more resilient way. So that's it. And hey, come along to we're planning a bigger event on the 24th of Jan, where we're going to go deeper into some of these topics. So more information on that soon.
Fantastic. Titilayo, our in-house therapist and everything. Please come and tell us.
I think the biggest thing that I find is that they find it hard to share their shame because they feel like I'm the only one, or there's something really wrong with me for having done this thing or said this thing. So the biggest thing I would say is that you're not alone. Like, there's nothing on this planet that happens to you. And so whatever it is, whatever secret it is that you feel like you have to keep inside, when you share it, it just relieves the burden. So reach out to someone that you feel safe with, because it's not everyone that you speak to. You need someone who's trained and who can contain. You don't want to be with someone who trivializes your issues and says, oh, but that's not a big deal, or oh, get over it, or oh, come on, be strong. No, you want someone who can really listen to you in a safe space and have fun. I think we get so busy and so serious in life, like find your sweet spot and do that fun thing every single week, every day if you can. Just have fun. And even you can have fun expressing your. I mean, me and my son, we have a bat, we have a pillow. When we're angry, we go in the bedroom and just bash things, jump up, throw things around, and he absolutely loves it because we're having fun, but we're also expressing ourselves. So have fun while you're doing it, expressing yourself, reach out, and make sure you do it in a safe way.
Super. Well, what can I say? Look, this is, as I said, we could go on for much, much longer. Really, really appreciate your time, your insights, sharing, the love, because that's part of this. People say, don't talk about that. You're a man. We'll talk about it.
For real.
Yeah. No, these conversations and the ability to have them, you're sharing of space, you're sharing of insight. This is not just all external. So, no, really appreciate it. Alexander, this is, as I said, this is my man. Alexander's here every day doing the doing. There's no, anyway, whatever has happened in the past, and this is not to trivialize it, but this man is very hardworking. That's all I can say. But anyway, we shall be back for sure. This is part of our Sema Live. You all know it as a podcast that comes out periodically. It will come out again in that form. We've now transitioned to a live broadcast, so expect much, much more. Thank you so much, and have a wonderful day, and God bless.
Bye.
Bye. Thanks for having us.
Thank you. Why not end with a song? The sound of the HiA Network. Thank you, Mr. Sakane, wherever you are. Ciao, ciao.